Hello there again, folks. As a quick reminder, during all of today's panels, you can drop a question into the sidebar, either in the chat section itself, or you'll see a tab next to it called Q&A, just in case you have a question that you don't want broadcasted out to everybody. And we will have time during each of today's panels to actually take questions from the audience. Don't worry about waiting until we say that, now we're going to respond to some questions, because I'm going to be curating them throughout. And we hope to be able to address all of people's questions today. Now, let's get into our next panel here. The SBIR and Sttr programs are about innovation. After all, it's in the name of the program. Well, SBIR at least. Sttr is still about innovation. And they're about creating something unique and novel that no one has ever done before, or at least got them right. But they're also about creating a product. Innovation for the sake of science isn't innovation. It's simply research, or even just invention. Small soapbox, big difference between invention and innovation. You hear more about that tomorrow when we talk about that topic. But there has to be an outcome with some type of commercial merit for it to really be innovation. There has to be some type of product being created for the health of the project and just the organization. Commercialization is not just a hallmark of SBIR and Sttr, but really, at the end of the day, it's also a critical factor for a company's future success. Our first panel for the day will actually dive into this discussion. This panel will be moderated by Ella Marowski, SBIR and Sttr Program Director at the National Science Foundation. Ella is a Program Director for the SBIR and Sttr program at NSF, where she manages technology portfolios involving advanced manufacturing, mobility, semiconductors, and robotics. For 2 decades, Ella engaged with startups and small businesses as a founder, executive officer, and scientific lead on the development of technologies involving medical devices, photonics for displays, semiconductor electronics, renewable energies, nanomaterials, and biotechnologies. She built strong collaborative partnerships across industry, academia, and federal labs to commercialize technologies that resulted in sustainable business models. Her current efforts focus on supporting resilience and sustainability in technology. Ella holds a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Colorado, a BA in chemistry from Columbia University, and completed a National Research Council postdoctorate at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. She will be joined by panelists Carlos Gutierrez, Carlos Murguia, and Peter Webley.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Del. As you know, I'm Ella Marowski, and I am going to sort of kick off this discussion with my what I call worldwide colleagues here. We're all in sort of the commercialization space, touching it in some way. First, I think maybe introduction, since you already know who I am from Del, I will start with a brief introduction from each of you, starting with Carlos Gutierrez first, because I see you, that's how I see you in my gallery view.
Yep, sure. Thanks, Ella. I'm Carlos Gutierrez, Chief Strategy Officer of Larda Institute. We're a LA-based nonprofit organization supporting early stage innovations and their translation of ideas to the marketplace. We design, manage, and deploy large-scale commercialization programs for both public sector partners and also private sector clients.
Great. Thanks for that, Carlos. Peter, I see you up next.
Thanks, Ella, and thanks for being able to be on the panel today. So I'm Peter Webley. I'm based at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in the Alaska Center for Innovation, Commercialization, and Entrepreneurship. So I'm a research faculty member, but I'm also part of the training program for the Innovation Core Training Program. That's actually supported by the National Science Foundation. And we have other training programs and funding resources to transition academic research out into community and commercialization success. So that's what I'm here to talk about and represent today.
Thanks for that, Peter. And of course, last but not least, Carlos Murguia.
Murguia, you got it right. Thank you, Ella. Carlos Murguia, I'm an Economic Development Officer at the Arrowhead Center at NMSU, and I am also the Associate Fund Manager at the Arrowhead Innovation Fund. We're a pre-seed and seed stage venture capital fund focusing on the strengths of the state. We make investments in water, agriculture, energy, and data. So very happy to be here.
Excellent. It's a fantastic group of folk here, and I'm going to dive right in with the first question. And feel free to jump in as you feel like you might have an answer quickly. So I'll call on you only if we have to wait in too much silence. So the first question is, what does commercialization and, more importantly, commercial success look like to you, and why?
Yeah,
I can jump in really quick if that's okay. Yeah, what does it look like? One of the things I would first say is rather than an end goal, it's an ongoing process. So I see it as commercialization as the ongoing effort to convey belief into a product and solution and develop a sustainable business model that is attached to that belief that gets your product to customers. And that takes reinvention every day. It takes pivots. So it's not just a destination, but it's conveying belief and then creating the business model to get customers that product of yours.
Thanks for that, Carlos. Peter, you also had something?
Yeah, it was more the success is making an impact. So where you are moving towards something, as Carlos G pointed out, sort of it's an ongoing process, but it's also an ongoing process where you make an impact locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. So therefore, your success is based around making impact for others, whether it's making their life easier, their environment better, them socially, their social standings. It's all about that sort of making an impact, and then you can then say the success we've made is to that group of individuals, that segment, that location. That to me shows success, and it's something you can measure.
Great. Carlos, any other ideas?
Yeah, for us, commercialization or commercial success is finding that niche market where you have a large number of customers and where you can get recurring revenue. And I think this last word is super important because it's not only selling once to a client, but finding a business model that allows you to keep getting that revenue for the business.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So I'm hearing, from y'all that one is that sustainable business model, which is keeping your doors open, keeping the lights on, and keeping people employed, right? And how are you going to do that with recurring revenue, and a market size that's large enough to actually support that, right? And then there's the belief, getting people to really, have faith in the product that you are delivering, and that it's quality and it's going to do what it says it does, and that they're working with the best people possible to make them feel that their needs are being met. And then to that, really kind of dovetails into, I guess, Peter, you were saying impact that you are providing to the communities, to the society as well, and making the world a better place to live in through technology. And then, of course, always, right? The world is changing. Nothing ever stays the same. I always joke about every new wrinkle that I get on my face is just an indication of time continuing to show changes. And so, yes, constantly having that interaction and rapport with, your potential customers, with what the market's doing, right? How is your product fitting in with that market? Is it stagnating? Is it changing? Is it changing appropriately? Is it time for a totally new model, right? Design on things. So thanks for that. I'm going to jump, and I'm going to start with Carlos M. on this one. So what is one aspect of commercialization that you think most small startups get wrong? And how can our audience avoid those pitfalls?
From what I have seen, I would say achieving commercial product market fit. Very often, startups focus so much on the product, and they forget that they need to also focus on finding the customer and designing something that is actually solving a need for that customer. So what we like to see in a portfolio company is for them to get to market quickly so that they can prove that someone is actually willing to pay for the products, that it has commercial value, and then continue the development of the technology as they move forward.
Thanks for that. Peter,
Yeah, I
what's
always, yeah. Sorry, I jumped in, but I always think back to when you're going through like the very early stage of innovation training. You take your business model canvas and you put your value proposition in the middle, but you always then go over to the customer segment, and you always go, as Carlos M says, is the fit. It's like you might think you have the greatest technology, but until you find out what the customer needs or what their pains are, and whether your product is a gain, you're going to have a nice, cool thing that you like, or maybe two of your friends and your colleagues like, or somebody, one individual is interested in, and 6 months later is like, well, it's nice to have. By listening, so listening early, and being able to adapt, and as Carlos G pointed out, pivot, because you pivot to the need, you pivot to the opportunity that's there, but you need to listen and find out what their opportunity is. And getting through that early means, as Carlos M points out, you then got to fit ready when you go to pitch for funding or finding partners, because they can see that there's a ability to scale and grow.
and Carlos G? Yeah.
Yeah, one other challenge or area that can be troubling is the assumptions, being really clear and specific on the assumptions that back up your growth prospects. We've seen a lot of growth prospects statements about, you're going to sell X number of units years 2 and 3, but then backing up, having reasonable assumptions about what's going to enable that to happen, right? In terms of your product maturity, where it needs to be at, your team, the number of people that are going to be executing that, who's going to be doing that. A lot of those assumptions need to be thought through a lot more specifically, and detailed and tested, so that you can back up those growth assumptions. That's oftentimes we sort of see a disconnect, or we'll sort of challenge and push against gently with some of the innovators we're working with about, okay, well, what are the assumptions that you're putting into place that are enable this kind of growth prospects in year 2 or 3 or 4? And that usually then elicits, a lot of sort of background discussion, a lot of revisions, and having estimates that need to get reworked.
Mm-hmm. So, Carlos, to that thread, where do you see people going to find the evidence to support their assumptions there? Do you have any recommendations or any stories about where you saw people come up with good idea or good data?
Yeah, I certainly look outside yourself. We have mentors that in our programs, but there are a lot of other good programs that have mentors and external people that are take advantage of their experience, their know-how. This is where you can become a sponge. This is where you really want to absorb as much information from others about what they've learned, the hits they've taken, the scar tissue they've had, about refining those assumptions and making sure that because I think doing it on your own is pretty difficult without having some of the outside help that's there. So avail yourself of people's experience and know-how and knowledge, and know who, not just know how, but know who.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just on the mentor side, if there's people listening in that sort of like, how do I find mentors, is look locally for programs that have, like Carlos G points out, that they might have mentors that are willing to give back. So even if you may not know where mentors might be, just look locally for people that manage programs and just reach out, because often it's somebody wants to give back, or maybe you find an alumni at your university that you graduated from that you could reach back to. So, but it's get out there and listen, but also absorb, as Carlos G points out.
There is a role that I like, and it's pretty common at universities. So a lot of the universities and university centers have entrepreneurs in residence. So this position is for someone who has walked the walk and walked the talk, So just reaching out, as Carlos and Peter mentioned, to someone who has actually taken an idea or a technology to the market. And I will also add, nothing beats customer discovery, and that can be done through mentors, through potential clients, and as Carlos mentioned, someone else than yourself. So just going out to the market and trying to validate idea, attending conferences, building a network of individuals, mentors, investors, of people who have some relevance in the industry and people who could open doors either through an introduction or through a facility site or through testing or even for some technical vetting. It's always good to have 2 or 3 opinions and validations, because at the end that's what we will do as an investors. If someone presents a technology, we want 3 or 4 opinions to de-risk the technology before we consider an investment opportunity.
Great, thanks for that. And then the last, I'll just say 2 cents, from the National Science Foundation's perspective, we do have the I-Core program that we support at various places to be able to help with that customer discovery. But doing some initial going out of your comfort zone and meeting with people and just having conversations is an important part to understand. Even if you do have a new market segment or emerging market where maybe there isn't a lot of information out there, that's oftentimes where NSF is a really good source of funds, because that is the riskiest. That is where a lot of the traditional funding won't go, because it's hard if you don't have that information on new market segments. But there is that aspect to it. Also, large impact too of your commercialization is also important. So I'll go to the next question. There's a recurring theme that people will hear a lot about over these 2 days, and Carlos Gutierrez already touched on it, and that is, teaming and partnering. So what does a solid team mean for you? And when looking at commercial success, why do you pick those players for the team? Like, what, are there any kind of insights you can give for what you've seen kind of work for folks? And this time I'll start with Peter, because I'm changing it up.
Sounds good. Yeah. So often you can't do everything yourself. So being able to think about, okay, what skills does an entrepreneur have, or somebody that's starting a company if they're very early stage, and looking to locally to find people with potential skills gaps that you may not have, but know that you will change those partners will develop, they'll have different roles. So to me, a strong partnership is just bringing in somebody that will has the same vision, but also has a potential skill that can allow you to grow beyond what you have as your own skills. You can go through training programs yourself, but often a solid partnership is finding somebody that has maybe a gap. So let's say, for example, you're the technical lead and you've developed all of the intellectual property, but you're looking for somebody to help you in that mentorship role. They could become an entrepreneurial industry mentor type of approach. So it's looking at where your own personal gaps are, and finding those that can support you to fill those gaps.
My thought on where we've seen team evolution is it having the right team for the right level of maturity where your company is at, right? If it's you may be more heavily skewed toward technical team, just because that's where you're at. You're solving technical unknowns, and people understand that, right? As you get into solving those unknowns and getting level of maturity of the technology and getting into delivering a product to the marketplace, it may change. You may need to change the team composition. There's also other ways to augment your team by having advisory panels, advisory boards, business and technical advisory boards to shore up some of those gaps without having to bring aboard a full-time team member. So that's also, and then the other piece I'd say is also don't feel like you have to have the perfect killer team. Be open and honest and upfront about where the gaps are, and that you have an intention and awareness of where those gaps are, and that probably the next 6 to 9 months you're going to need to get someone that has this particular skill set, and people will understand that, right? Whether it's agencies or any other organization that you're pitching, they just want a level of awareness of the entrepreneur or the PI about how the team could change, where the needs may come in the future, and where you're at now.
And I will only add that for a pre-seed or seed stage startup, we like to see 2 or 3 roles in a team. The technical person, the CTO, a CEO that is dealing with the capital raise, with the commercial aspect of it, and then a CFO, someone who is looking at the financial, at the books, and keeping track. And from those roles, then you can expand on bringing more technical people or commercialization people under each of them, but at least we want to see a balance. In any given team, you need to have someone who is very strong with the technical part of it, but also someone who is uh, experienced to take that technology to the market.
So I would say, what kind of time commitments are you looking for from these team members? Like what, do you want them there full time? Do you want them there, at least part time? Like what kind of commitments do you look for in the team?
I will say, depending on the stage, if this is something you're working on the side and you have a full-time job, you can still like, okay, just get like part-time people. But as soon as you raise capital, the investors will want you to focus full-time on this. So I think depending on the stage, depending on the IP, depending on the grant application, and depending on the needs, if this is something that represents a very important commercial opportunity, you want to put all your time on it and just be the first one to enter the market.
Great. Yeah, from an SBR perspective, there is a minimum time commitment that we expect from the PI of that, and that is 21 or more hours with the company is a requirement. And so, part of the things that folks judge on is how committed the team is to the success of the project, right? And so that comes in varying forms, as Carlos said, during different times as the company grows. But as more money comes online and is at stake, the more you want that commitment to be tightened up. And so, it makes sense that commensurately things happen as the folks here on the panel have mentioned. So, yeah. With that, I'll close that chapter on teamwork. Of course, we can always revisit with any questions that we have from the audience. So, next question. Commercialization is something people will be doing throughout the entire life of their business, as Carlos said. And so, what is one thing related to commercialization that people should do on a regular, rotating basis? And why is that important for a healthy organization? And this time I'll start with Carlos G, because you touched on this before.
One thing related to commercialization that they should always be thinking about, and okay, I would say your customer motivations and changing tastes and preferences in that customer. Always be really hyper focused on just knowing them, knowing the evolution of how they make decisions, of how often they make decisions, what cycles they make decisions in, what pressures they may be facing, right? So your customer may be someone else's customer, maybe serving someone else. So understanding the whole value chain of where they fit in, what are their pressures, what are they responding to? That's probably what I would say if I was, going to just be laser focused on one thing, is just knowing the heck out of what drives this customer. What are their motivations? What are their pressures? What are they, worrying about? Who are their stakeholders? Who are their influencers? Having a grip on that will usually set yourself up pretty well to be prepared for any variations in their in their world, right, in their environment and ecosystem.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, this is. I would say just adding on that getting that feedback as you're developing. You can also see them as like, if you know them to that level of detail, when you bring something else out as an add-on to the existing product, you know that they're gonna take it and add on an additional cost to that. They might be originally a user of your product, but eventually they might be the person paying the bill for the product. So then knowing what they're willing to pay to access that, even if they originally were just a user. So I'm thinking of the user, influencer, advocate type of role, that customers change those roles over time. So if you know them to the level of detail that Carlos G is highlighting, you know how to be able to connect with them as you add something to an existing product, the plus item, and sort of what are they going to want, so that such that they're knocking on the door wanting it as you're rolling it out the door, rather than hoping that they're going to want it. So it's all about sort of that continual customer feedback and understanding as you develop, and even as you grow and accelerate, you've still got the ability, the need to go back to and interact with your existing customer base.
There is a tool that I like and that we have seen our portfolio companies use very, very often, the business model canvas, which I think covers everything that Carlos and Peter were saying. So with this one canvas, our recommendation will be to look at it every 6 months, to talk about key partners, key activities, resources, the value proposition, the cost, the relationships, and this gives you an idea on how the market is performing, any politics, any new um, regulations coming into place, and having a general idea. So your business model canvas was probably different before the pandemic, that during the pandemic and after the pandemic. So just looking at what are the key stakeholders for your business and your organization every 3 months, I think it's important for a healthy organization to continue to be on top.
Great. And, I always say, be careful not to put all your eggs in one basket. Does anyone know what I'm speaking about when I say that? So anyone want to talk about maybe, that exciting opportunity that you have with a major player, like, and maybe some insights to provide in sort of centering yourself in that excitement to make sure that you're moving forward with eyes wide open.
Well, I know what you mean by eggs in one basket, but I would say that it's sort of remembering that you want to be diverse, but not too diverse. So you want to be able to have different angles that you're looking at, and not rely on sort of just one channel or one customer that, if it ends, you don't have the doors open, for example. But getting to the point where, if you're going in too many directions and you go to Carlos M or Carlos G for funding, and you're like, well, hang on a moment, how can you do all of that? You're not being realistic. You're going with too many directions, and you're spreading yourself too thin. So too many eggs in one basket, but too many baskets with a single egg is another one that you would have a problem. So it's a fine balance, but it's been able to justify why you're presenting that to whether somebody's funding you, whether it's a federal agency or like yourselves, or a VC type of approach, is the justification behind it. Carlos G mentioned about sort of the justification on partners and there's all of these things. You've just got to justify the numbers behind your evidence, and that's a significant component when you're submitting a grant application, proposing for funding, whatever it is. You just got to justify why you're doing it, and what the evidence is behind it.
Yeah. We encourage companies, phase one awardees we're working with, to identify alternative markets, to do some exploration of those markets. There may be low-hanging fruit, or at least an initial, what we call sort of a beachhead customer, that they might be able to approach and build some sustainability to the enterprise. And they should do that. And I think that's a demonstration of that. You can be nimble, you can adjust to customer needs. That's a good characteristic to demonstrate. As Peter said, you don't also want to be too diffuse in markets. You understand, and maybe you can even tell a story of saying, look, this is our initial market, this is how big it is, and this is why we're going there. our product sees ultimate value in this market, which is going to be gigantic, and we're going to get there, and this is the pathway to get there. As long as you have an idea of demonstrating the pathway to get there, people will be pretty forgiving and understanding, and you can sort of, diversify a little bit and, play different markets, to show that you have that nimble ability to meet diverse customer needs. But other than that, you just can't say, we have a platform technology. It serves 8 different markets, and here they all are. Isn't this fantastic? That's usually not a good recipe when you're telling the story.
Mhm.
And what I would say is, in addition to what Carlos G mentioned, there is the beachhead client, but I think companies should focus on a beachhead market, meaning that there are multiple customers, because of course the technology has to target not only one client but multiple clients across multiple industries. You need to find one that is large enough at the beginning, but also you shouldn't be distracted trying to address that particular need, because that time and focus could be a distraction from achieving a commercial product market fit for the industry itself.
Great. Thanks for that. So, next question. What is one resource that you would like to highlight during today's panel discussion? Why do you think it's a good resource for commercialization success?
I'll jump in, and it actually connects in on what Carlos M highlighted, is the business model canvas, the lean canvas, the mission canvas, whatever you want to call it, whether you're applying to DoD or you're applying to NSF or NIH or whatever the 3-letter acronym that you're looking for early stage research and development, is just these canvases are out there, and then there's training programs local, nationally, to help you understand how to effectively use those in your customer discovery. So if you are looking at early stage phase 1 submission for an SBIR approach, or your early stage doing local R&D development, is use these, but also if you're unused to using them, get some training support. So then you can be able to pitch your value proposition, your customer segment, and the funding you need, the ask you have when you're pitching. But being able to tap into local trainings where things like the business model canvas, there's both state and national programs. So that's the thing I'd like to highlight for those looking at the SBIR tracks, is get access to those early, and listen.
I have 2 recommendations. One is being super active on LinkedIn, building an online presence, and use that tool to connect with other peers in the industry, to talk to potential advisors, investors. And the second one, it's to attend demo days as soon as the technology can be disclosed, to get that practice about pitching the technology, having an elevator pitch, 2-3 minutes, and being able to deliver a message about the science and the technology with the commercial implications. Because very often companies and entrepreneurs who have a technical background have a very hard time explaining what is the technology for. They get super excited about the science behind it, but it's hard for them to explain, like, hey, this has applications and I'm already talking to these people. So being exposed to other companies presenting, or even you having the opportunity to present in 2-3 minutes, I think it's key as they keep understanding their commercial application and value.
Yeah, related to what Carlos said, I was going to say reaching out to alumni via LinkedIn. I've used it, and it's been fantastic in terms of getting feedback. The other resources, states have local economic development offices, small business advocate offices. In California, we had something called Cal-OSBA, Office of Small Business Advocate, and that's their singular goal, is to try to enable opportunities for small business to grow, and they have tremendous networks. We'll give you one quick example. We were doing a project for SBR awardees, USDA SBR phase 1 and phase 2s, for a product that could fit into small to medium meat and poultry processors. Where do you start? But I reached out to Cal OSBA, and they happen to have people in the Central Valley, California, who said, yeah, of course we know some small, medium meat poultry processors. Here are their names, and you can reach out to them. So, people are willing, and you really don't know who they may know. You may be very surprised. So don't be shy about asking. Be shameless. Be genuine, but be aggressive, and you may be surprised.
Great. I'm going to segue a little, and it's commercialization, and now kind of dabbling in. What we have 3 review criteria in SF, and it's intellectual merit. That's how exciting is that technology? How much is it pushing the current state of the art? How difficult is it? Is it risky? Is it pre-seed kind of money where it's too risky for investors to invest in? We have the broader impacts, which is how can it impact and be a positive impact on society? And then there's commercial potential. How are you going to keep your doors open? And so, I've noticed that, there's a lot of interest and, mass in terms of entrepreneurs setting their sights on social entrepreneurship, where they would really like to have that company have that positive impact on society. Oftentimes, they say they're struggling with making that stronger business case for investment, since their target markets may not be that large. And so my question to you is, is there any advice you give for these, or any discussion that we can have around, citing, pairing of broader impacts with commercial potential?
That's a very good question. What we like to see, and depending, of course, on the fund thesis, there are multiple ways to measure impact and to measure mobility or social impact. So, a number of jobs, number of minorities involved in the company, potential impact on minorities' lives. Say, for example, we're working on a technology that is enabling better or a technology or betterment of female tech or female health. You might not be a minority company, but you are impacting a minority. So that's a nice way to put it, and to say, hey, whatever technology I'm working on has a potential impact not only on the planet or not on my region, but on this target industry or on this demographic.
Thanks for that, Carlos. Anyone else want to add?
I would just say you can't make an impact if you don't have an ability to remain viable, right? I'm just you, there has to be, you have to focus first of all on repeatable customers, viability, profitability, capital efficiency. That will enable you to have the impacts. If you lead with the impacts, one has to serve the other, I think. The impacts are important, and you should have a good story about societal contributions of the technology and how to convey that, whether it's to an individual or a community or a segment. But you shouldn't take your eye off what I mentioned before, of the commercial viability.
Peter, anything to add?
Yeah, the other one is, if you're looking at, so let's say a community in a rural environment, an underrepresented program, is what revenue do you bring into the region that stays in the region? So therefore, those individuals can stay in their community and not have to leave to do their job or provide for their family. Then you can say, well, without us, this revenue wouldn't have come in, and this society or this region wouldn't have been able to prosper. But Carlos G highlights, you need to be viable, and then you'll have an impact. Without the viability, your impact, you're saying you've got an impact, well, you won't actually make an impact. So you can have the numbers that Carlos M highlighted, but it's all about the revenue you can bring in that can stay, and then you can say, we've brought in more X number of jobs, we've reduced the costs of this particular pain that the community had, but it's still, you need to bring the revenue in to be able to have the impact.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, and from the National Science Foundation has that broader impacts review criteria. And of course it is, you're right, Carlos, if you can't keep the lights on, the doors open, and the people employed, there's no impact at all in that.
Right.
And so it does have to be that way. But, when we look at it as, applying to the SBR program, we look at it as a stool that has different lengths of a leg. And so, perhaps that commercial potential can include that broader impact. And some way, in some ways, sometimes what you may make for your community could be broadly scaled, right? So really keeping your sights open about, if I were to make the plan with the impact and opening the doors, right? How would that look? And so again, it creates a very systems level view that's complex, and it's in the complexity. Like we make this panel sounds like, oh, all you need to do is these things, you need to look at these things. But what you forget is like each conversation you have with a person is different than the next and the next and the next. And so ultimately each of you has to synthesize that through your lens, through the lens of your team, and and that concept. And so keeping in mind that you can look at things, that there is no recipe for success here, but it is about really just managing things in a way. And so as a program, we don't necessarily say, oh, you absolutely have to have really this large market. The larger market's going to be the winning proposal. It's not necessarily the case in our program. It's about really having a diversity of technologies out there, a diversity of approaches out there, and it's a lot more complex than that. So that's not the last question. So what we have as the last question is sort of like story time. And I love stories, right? So I always talk to my awardees through stories because it kind of exemplifies things. And I try to give ones that are reasonably, impactful, but maybe nobody's ever going to fit in that story, right? There's so many business books out there, and there's new ones constantly coming online because there's change inevitable. So I'm talking more to give you all each some time to figure out, like, what's a story that you might tell that was either like a success, a really good learning experience that you saw, from your lens, and that could maybe help people, feel inspired that there's potential, or oh, I should look at that, or something along those lines. Anything commercialization wise, and I'll give it some quiet time too, and let whoever wants to go first kind of raise their hand and jump in.
I
Great,
have a
Carlos.
story. Yeah, one of our portfolio companies is this entity, this company that licensed a technology from a university in New Mexico. Between grants, SBIRs, and other sources of non-dilutive capital, they were able to raise $3.5 million just for the technical de-risking. So when they came to the fund, like, hey, listen, guys, we're working on this. It's already tested at the lab. We're getting ready to finding customers and move the technology forward. We have been an investor at the pre-seed and the seed stage. And I'm using this example to show how SBIR funding is super attractive to investors when you see when the company use the funding in the appropriate timing and when they use it to de-risk the technology. So our funding doesn't go to technical or to R&D anymore. It goes to sales, it goes to marketing, it goes to taking the technology from the science, from the lab to actual customers. And it's also a good investment for us because they use non-dilutive capital to grow the company. So our investment buys more ownership or more shares in the company. And we have a better valuation. We are willing to put more money. So that's been a successful case. We use it everywhere. Like, hey, whenever there's someone uh, trying to get SBIR funding, we encourage them to start also talking to angel investors and to start talking to pre-seed funds to see what is the match and how they can leverage both resources, one to de-risk the technology and the other one to start the commercialization plan.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Carlos. Anyone else? Story time?
We had, I'll share one story. We were working with a DOE funded company. It was developing a very niche product for particle accelerators. So very focused, very small markets, but in the discussion with their mentor and exploration of potential applications and characteristics, attributes of what they were working on, the product and the technology, we were able to connect them with folks at UCLA to explore cancer detection. or its insertion, right, within a cancer detection system. So sometimes it could be a subsystem within a larger system. Your solution doesn't necessarily need to be the entire solution. And lo and behold, it opened up an entirely new, likely more profitable market for them in medical device, cancer detection equipment. But that wouldn't have come if there wasn't, the diversity of outside questions or exploration, or that kind of keeping your antennas open to identifying adjacent markets you may be able to solve, and testing them not foolishly, but in a very capital efficient way. But this opened up another opportunity for them. So that was pretty good to see. Another quick story is we had these companies together for what we call a feed forward session. It's kind of like feedback, but cute play on words, feed forward. And we bring together customers and potential investors. And we had a guy from Novo Nordisk talking to the company. And in the course of that discussion said, well, this is interesting. If you take it in this direction, this might be really interesting to us. And it was a real light bulb moment for that company to identify where they could adjust their technical approach to short circuit a quicker pathway to the market, potential customer. So, small moments like that can yield pretty large outcomes and be transformational in how a company adjusts its resources.
Great. Thanks for that. Peter?
Yeah, I would probably, my story goes to a fairly early stage company that was looking at potential market for its technology and was going through some ICOR training. So they were reaching out to a network in here in the state, and they spoke to some individuals and found that there wasn't the fit where they thought there was. But at the very end, we always say, remember to ask who they can connect you with beyond the person you spoke to, because so they then said, oh, we know what we've heard more about who you are. Here's some people to connect with. They became the interested groups to do a demo of the technology, not the first set of conversations. So the story that I always tell is, remember at the end of anything is there anybody else you could connect us with? Carlos G highlighted that. And another example is you could bump into somebody in the coffee area, or you could meet somebody on a bus or in an elevator. That might not be the person, but you can always say, hey, here's my card. Do you know anybody? Or do you have a card? Do you know anybody to connect with? So remembering that the person you may think is the right fit, they may know somebody because they know more about you. They could become your advocate. And it led to them, that company, going into other accelerator programs in the States because of that. Oh, do you know somebody that you connect us with based on what you've heard about us? So that was a very early stage, but has led to them to grow and get into other programs that's built even further connections going forwards.
Great. Well, thanks for that. At this point, I would say we could open up the panel for any questions, and I think Del is going to be navigating those for us.
Yes, I am. So now time for the voice of God to come in with questions. We've had a couple that have come in, and I'm going to start. We've had a couple that actually need to be kind of combined. So first question, and you started to talk towards this, Carlos G, but if a small startup is trying to figure out their kind of navigation pathway, and they're really looking to find, new team members, new partners, people that can kind of help them take it to that next step, where should they start looking?
Well, I'd probably say you need to do a lot of talking. Local meetups. Now, I'll give you an example. Tomorrow we have a group called Bioscience LA is having a Bioscience Summit event. So, if there was a company that was looking for talent, I would say go to things like that. Find out organizations organizations that have a particular affinity in your area, in your topic, and show up, talk to people, let them know where you're at, let them know you're looking for individuals, and you want to connect. And oftentimes that's probably going to yield um, some results for you. You'll at least sort of start getting the ball rolling. You need some momentum, and having those venues when you can have discussions, have that constant body contact sport with other people about where you're at, where your growth prospects are, and who you're looking for, and the characteristics of the person you're looking for, where you can start to have a frequency of sharing that. That's what I would recommend.
Anybody else want to jump in on that thought of where people can find team members or partners?
Thanks on that, Del. I would also think is that go to some of even early stage entrepreneurial ones. Maybe if you feel that the summit isn't the right place to go to, there's things like startup weekends. You may not be working on your own idea, but you meet individuals with the same mindset. I remember I turned up to one 2 years ago that was part of the online startup environment, because we were in the first, everybody was working from home, ended up working on an idea, but found somebody in that team that had a similar research background to myself, and we ended up conversing and are still chatting 2 years later, not as often as we were 2 years ago, but so sometimes it's just getting out there in wherever it might be a social hangout for a coffee. Entrepreneurs, just all the way to what Carlos G was highlighting, is if you get out there and talk to people, you never know who you'll connect with.
And Dale, I would just add, if the entrepreneurs or founders are looking for angel investment money, a lot of the times the angel investors are either retire or they have like some flexibility to join startups. So finding an investor who is aligned with the technology or has expertise in the technology, it's a great way to either get introductions to other potential team members or to even bring them as a team member themselves.
Great. And one thing that I would also like to highlight to people, and you kind of talked about this, Peter, is there is this really great button on the left-hand side of everybody's screen that looks like 3 people sitting together. This is an amazing opportunity to find others, find partners, find team members, find other small businesses that are working in a similar area, find support organizations, find funders, find investors. We have a wealth of people here for you to connect to. Use that button, find people, connect with them, send them a message. Don't send me a message. I ain't looking at anything today. I'm kind of busy. But send everybody else a message. Find somebody that can help you move forward. So, speaking of helping people move forward, commercialization plans are not only a requirement for a lot of different SBIR and Sttr agencies, but kind of at the heart of it, I don't even know if strong, at least a decent commercialization plan is something that everybody should have at hand when they're looking at, where do I want to be in 3 years? Where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years, besides not owning a business anymore? So in y'all's eyes, what is one element that makes for a kind of really strong, really standout commercialization plan? And I'd also like to get your answer on this, Ella, from the NSF perspective.
I'm definitely going to kick it to my colleagues first, so I can have the last word.
If I can jump on this one, we like to see an exit strategy. At the end of the day, if you are having investors on the table, they want to make some return on their money. So as you build your commercialization plan, and as you are thinking of raising capital, you need to either compare yourself with other similar startups and see, or even provide some data like, hey, this competitor was acquired by this company, or this competitor went all the way to IPO, or this competitor was able to sell or license their technology. So having an exit for you and for the investors is key.
I would say good, diverse letters of support from potential funders, from potential partners, customers. Having a strong letter that conveys belief in your product, technology, innovation, and its potential insertion and contribution to the market, to a company, your proposal, and you can embed, or even having a narrative, right, in your commercialization plan where you speak to the commitment and interest of and the headway you've made with the commercial marketplace, would be a very strong element of your commercialization plan.
I'll add so I can give Ella the last word. For me, it's you talked, Dell, about the 3, the 5, the 10-year plan, and Carlos M talked about an exit strategy, but understanding that it's not a straight road, that you will need to adapt. You will need to adapt to your customers. You'll need to adapt to the market. You'll need to adapt to society. You'll need to adapt to the economic climate of the country. So while having a plan of where you're going, you want to show that you're not just some group going in multiple different directions, but understanding that you will need to adapt that plan. You talk about a 5-year plan with yearly updates, a 10-year plan with 3-year updates. Those are sort of the things that I see. And then you can show that you've hit targets along that way towards that longer term plan, but understand that you do need to adapt to opportunities that are out there. But if you're looking for the VC type of side, then yeah, you do want to show that they're going to get some investment back. But if you're earlier stage, you want to show that you can adapt to as your technology develops. You ideate upon your value proposition, and then you might go in a slightly different direction, but you're still going towards that longer term goal and that aim that you highlighted at the very beginning.
Yeah. And I thank everyone for saying that. There's a lot of important things in there. From the, NSF's perspective, evidence to support the claims you're making. So that ties back to Carlos G's comment on, stakeholder letters. Like, where is the evidence to support the claims that you're making in your commercialization plan? That's a key element for NSF, because we are reviewing it, and then we're almost, in essence, putting a stamp of approval. And so that evidence is, as a researcher, regardless of whether it's market research or whatever kind of research, there's got to be evidence. And then, with regard to like maybe exit strategies, I mean, yes, we have $240 million that come into the program. That's about $1 for every adult taxpayer in the country, right? Represented in this. We have we take on more risk than any other agency does, because that is our purview. Is we need to take the risk where nobody's taking it, and so that also includes, in that possible potential commercial potential. So, if there's a new market or an emerging market, a lot of people aren't going to look at it, and there's going to need to be somebody that de-risks that aspect of it, and that's oftentimes where we fall. The payback of that is that we've moved current state of the art. We've really changed things out there. Oftentimes hard to actually put a finger on exactly how much that generated in terms of commercial aspects, economic growth, and things like that. But those are important things for us to consider. Is that if nobody else is doing this, who else is going to do it, right? And if it's really that needed, and so there'll be a lot of diversity in our portfolios, as you can see through our awards database, because that's an important aspect of representing the $240 million that are in our portfolio.
And I'm going to use that answer to actually kind of jump into our next question, because Carlos, you kind of spoke to it. Peter reinforced it. Ella, I think you really drove it home, is evidence-based. Everything needs to be evidence-based. People assert, then defend. Assert, then defend. Because if they can't defend the assertion, it's opinion. It's not fact. And agencies and even potential investors, partners, they want to see that evidence, they want to see those facts. So from kind of that idea and that standpoint, a lot of the people attending today, more than likely a lot of people that will watch the recordings, which remember, everybody, these are being recorded, so they'll be up on our YouTube channel later, are going to be very small startups, not really sure where to go to get that evidence, not sure how deep they need that evidence to be when they're just starting out. Realize that this is kind of a weird question to answer, but from each of your perspectives, how deep do they need to go in that kind of fact-finding, fact-gathering mission when they're looking at things like market, customers, relationships, before looking at potential investment, whether it's venture capital, third-party investment, whether it's non-dilutive investment by the SBIR and Sttr programs? How deep do they need to pull out that fact book and go, see, page 4, subparagraph 8, section 3, word 5 says this?
It's a little bit of commensurate with the level of funding you're pursuing, right? Doesn't it sort of follow that, right? So if you're looking for really just very looking for a grant level funding, you should have a good discussion. You should have a notional idea of the market, who your customers are, what their motivations are. As you're looking at seed, Series A, you have to get a lot more granular and demonstrate a lot more effort and evidence in establishing that pull from customers. So I would probably say the level of intensity ramps up with the level of funding that you're pursuing.
I would add, in sort of like on the SBIR type of side of it, is that you're going to do the intellectual merit side of it. You're going to show research papers that show the current state of the art and where you're pushing the boundary. So that's going to be your evidence type of look where we are versus existing society, and that's why NSF should be looking to support it or reviewing it. But then your commercialization referencing is going to be those people that want it at the end of the funding, at the end of the phase 1 or the phase 2 or either phase 3 commercialization. So getting access to that early means you've got the evidence to put into that section of the commercialization opportunity. So if you're going for like an SBIR phase 1, access pre-SBIR phase 1 training that's out there, because it can help you get that evidence. So just like you would be evidencing the technical readiness level, you hear TRLs often used a lot. You also want to do, I would say, commercialization as readiness level. Where are you in your commercialization, and doing the same process? And the customers, the stakeholders, are your reference material, just like scientific journals might be for technology.
What I will say, and in addition to your comments, Dale, there are a lot of third-party organizations running reports, state-of-the-art reports on different industries. So those are available every quarter, every semester, every year. So just citing information that is being validated by a third party, so that it becomes a fact, not an opinion. So that someone else is saying that this is where the industry is headed to, and these are the opportunities, or this is how big the market is. So relying on someone else's data.
So then from the perspective of the NSF SBIR program, it's a phased approach. And so it does talk, the phase 1 is $275K. It's a feasibility study. And so we don't expect you to have a full-fledged business plan, because we don't even know if this technology is going to go. You're supposed to be looking at those go, no-go technical aspects. Like, if this doesn't work, I shouldn't be wasting my time on this because it's not going to work. And then, but it had really high potential. So we're going to see, this could be a game changer. Maybe we'll, invest in this and see how it goes. So in those proposals, really, like the bare minimum is, what's the current state of the art out there? What are the value propositions, that are being driven? by those, where are your value propositions and why? Why do you see those that way? Can you explain to us why you see them that way? I always say don't throw the whole kitchen sink in, because, as I've had in my own experience, when you go to raise funding, when you get to that fourth point, people have forgotten your first point, right? So you really want to message well and focus on sort of the strongest, most important aspects. And so also, when it becomes evidence, we don't necessarily need you to go and buy reports and spend money, but going out to your network. And some people, this is what I've seen, is some people have been resourceful and they've gone to some free conferences that are aligned with where their technology is going to be, and they go and they talk to the people at the conferences, or maybe they'll go through their networks, they'll go to the sort of groups that are meeting that Carlos G mentioned. Okay, it's in this aspect, it's in my area, I'll go and see, and maybe I'll ask folks if I could talk to them about, pain points that the market's having, just some preliminary, like discussions with people in that field. And it's a really important thing to get used to talking to people and not being too shy about it in terms of getting that information when you're first out there. So I guess those are kind of the minimums, because when you get to a phase one, if you're successful in competing and being awarded, we have 10K that we have you delineate in your budget to go do customer discovery, and then you're assigned, a coach in the boot camp, which is like a mini I-Core, and then you have access to a supplement where you could do a full-fledged I-Core, and you can get up to 130 interviews that way. So it gives you an idea that we have that program to help, vet that, because oftentimes you may have gone with your 10 discussions and said, this is where we go, looks good, and then you get to 20 or 30 and you're like, actually this other one's better. As Carlos also mentioned, you may pivot because you may see something that's lower. You never know when that information becomes available, because there's a lot going on in the world. And then come to phase two, after you've had all those resources, plus you've worked with a commercialization, expert helping guide you in that commercialization plan, you really start, you've had resources to dig in, right? And so that's when you really start to need to provide more solid information that really supports the details, that trajectory, right? In the beginning, it's like, is there even a market for this? And then later is, how are you going to get into that market? And then we have to, mind you, we have experts coming on. They've seen lots of companies go through, they've seen lots of things. And the last thing you want to do is make a claim that clearly people on this panel know is not true. Right. And so, and that's a killer. So, and it's a silly kind of mistake to make. I always tell people, lay out all your cards on the table. Look at the ones that are not the ones that you like the most, right? Forget the queens, the aces, and and the kings, and look at the ones, twos, and threes. Those are like your riskiest ones. Those are the ones that aren't going to get you a good hand. How do you either get those out of the playing field? How do you address them? What do you do with those? And be honest with yourself. Try to be happy with yourself and critical with yourself, and manage that landscape when you're trying to find that information.
I think all of you gave some really great answers and actually spun up my next question. Because one of the things that we always cover in any of the events that at least I'm a part of and that I have some say in is it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've talked about some good, we've talked about some bad. And I think with what each of you just brought up, there is one ugly fact kind of remaining. And I'd like to hear, since we're very different kind of circumstances, very different experiences, some expertise, to each of you, what is that ugly point where somebody goes, this isn't commercializable? What do I do with this? Can I get funded? What does this do? Is there a future for me? If somebody runs into that, in your eyes, each of you, is there anything they can do to salvage that? And what can they do to salvage it? I realize that these are all hard-hitting questions, so take a couple seconds.
I will say, just to continue to do customer discovery and pivot. I think Carlos G mentioned earlier that you might find another application for the technology. So you're probably looking at or you're probably too early for where the industry is at, or you might find more value in applying the same technology in another industry. So, but at some point, you also need to be very honest with yourself. And after 1-2 years trying, and if you don't hear any positive feedback from mentors or investors, just decide that this is a no-go. And this is why the SBIR and the ICOR programs are just phenomenal for this endeavor.
I would add, if you get that, is to stop and breathe. Don't take stock. This is where your mentor network can be very helpful. This is where people have pivoted the industry. They've stopped potential value proposition and gone somewhere else. You hear people of ending one company and starting up another one, even though they haven't had an exit strategy. It's just because they didn't see that there wasn't a fit, but they saw another idea. So just take stock, breathe, and tap into your network, which is why the network is so important, because they can be your support and be your advocates, whatever the outcome is, whether it's a commercial success to an exit or a stop. Okay, what's next?
Determine whether this is a temporary setback or a real severe limitation to to getting your product to the market and seeking commercialization. So I think probably just validate, is it, entrepreneurs are always going to be hitting walls, and tenacity is a great trait and an excellent quality to have. You need that. You need to be passionate, but also I think and you're going to be discouraged, but make sure you have a consensus of other trusted people you can talk to determine, is this a temporary setback? Is this a minor setback that can be overcome, or am I looking at a real systemic issue that really should give me pause about maybe redirecting what I'm doing, redirecting the enterprise? That would be my advice: is distinguish between those two, discern.
I don't really have anything to add. I think those were all great answers. You really want to be, sustainability, your own sustainability usually may make you have to make that decision as well. So that's something to think about too.
And those were all very excellent answers. And just like to take a moment and thank each one of you for being on this panel today. Was some really great insights, with some really great information. And now we are going to transition back to me being on stage. So, hello everybody, and thank you again, Ella, Carlos, and Peter, for that awesome panel and all of that information on commercialization. It's this point that we're going to take a very short break in the program here, and we want to give everybody a good 15 minutes or so to visit that expo hall and connect with somebody else. Connect with somebody that can help you take that next step in commercialization. Find somebody that's going to be a partner. Find somebody that's going to be a team member. We've got so many different booths, from support organizations to research partners, federal agencies for you to peruse. Visit those booths, talk to their staff members, set up a meeting, and just find out more. Our next panel is going to start at 12:25, and we're going to be playing some very kind of light music, elevator music, while we have a static agenda slide up on the screen, and we get ready to transition to the next element in our schedule. See y'all shortly.